What's your best? I didn't just dodge a bullet, I dodged a tactical nuke story. I was about 11 years old and my dad wanted me to come along with him to pick up some furniture about 30 minutes away. I made a huge stink about it, basically being an annoying little male adolescent turd saying how I wanted to stay at home and play. I told him I'd be really good and that it was way too boring for me. He finally got fed up and stormed out and told me to stay put, and he'd be back soon. About an hour later, he comes home in a police car, pretty shaken up, and just reached over and hugged me really hard. Turns out that he was driving down the highway and traffic got super busy ahead. This semi-truck in the lane next to my dad tried to stop too late and jackknifed. When it was coming to a stop, from swerving all over the road, it fell over on the passenger side of my dad's car, right where I would have been if I had gone along with him. The car was totaled, obviously, with the entire passenger side crushed down flat. Actually, he was lucky. He made it out alive. He never made another big deal about me coming along if I said I really didn't want to go. Not the same. Not by a long shot, but your story reminds me of the car accident I was in. We were in Texas at Six Flags theme park, and we were getting ready to leave when a huge storm hit. I was actually in a wheelchair at the time because I hurt my foot and I almost always sit in the passenger seat of the car. I have a sister who was 3 years younger than me, so I always claimed the front seat. However, we'd had a disappointing day at the park and I wanted to get home. For some stupid reason, she just had to get a funnel cake. So I was really annoyed at her. She then asked me for the front seat. I was going to say no, obviously, but something just overcame me and I said sure. It was already such a bad day. I didn't want the hassle of arguing. I figured it was no big deal and I'd just sit in the middle row with my other younger cousins. Well, about 15 minutes later on the highway, in pouring rain, we hydroplaned and slammed into the concrete railing so hard that we flipped twice in the air and landed on the roof. Everyone was okay and we climbed out of a broken window. Later, we were inspecting the car. I'm about 2 inches taller than my sister. Right in the passenger side door, one of the metal frames had caved in and missed my sister's head by ½ an inch. If I had been sitting there that day, it would have caved right into my skull. It's so weird how the universe works. Holy crap, that is just wild. Especially the first commenter who literally could have been crushed if they were there. An interesting thing I like to think about though, which probably ruins these types of stories, is that if the person were actually there are a bunch of tiny little things that would have happened because of their presence. Them being there could have meant the car accident would have never happened in the first place. A small example is, maybe you did something that made your dad stop and say something to you. All of those tiny interactions add up to a few seconds or even minutes, meaning you would not have been next to the truck in the first place. Pretty crazy to think about this stuff. I went to Boston University and lived less than a mile from the finish line of the Boston Marathon. In 2013, my friends and I had decided that we were going to walk down to the finish line to see the end of the race. We would do this after a light morning drink, as is tradition for college students on Marathon Monday. We got way too drunk and decided to go to McDonald's instead. We quite literally dodged a bomb. Context for those who might not know. 2013 was the year of the Boston Marathon bombing. Oh my god, I remember the day I heard about the Boston Marathon bombing. I was in Egypt at the time. I worked with a few Americans, but I was mostly working with Egyptians and Israeli people as well. I heard the news from the Americans and I couldn't believe what happened. It sucked because I did not have access to television at the time, so I only saw pictures of the event. This person definitely dodged a literal bomb here. There were a few days where all my appliances were breaking down. First the clothes washer, then the air conditioner, then the dishwasher. Then one morning, before leaving for work, the refrigerator stopped cooling. I was in a terrible mood on my commute to work. And then I had a flat tire in the middle of rush hour traffic. I pulled over to the shoulder. Normally, I would have got out immediately and started changing it. I can change a tire in 5 minutes. It wouldn't have even made me late. But everything breaking in the days leading up to this flat tire had me totally defeated. I rested my head on the steering wheel for a few seconds and said out loud, "Why me?" when almost as an answer, I was hit from behind. Traffic had slowed down because I had pulled over, and an ambulance driver transporting a patient between hospitals decided to go around the traffic by driving in the breakdown lane. Damage to my vehicle was minor, but if it had been any other day, I would have been taking my jack and spare out at that moment and been crushed between my car and the ambulance. Everything worked out great. I got a 5-figure settlement from the ambulance company, as they were clearly at fault for hitting a car in the breakdown lane. It was a non-emergency transportation of a patient, and when I got home that day, all the appliances were miraculously working again. Man, that is so freaking wild. Is it just me, or am I the only one who is absolutely terrified of the thought of walking on a highway? Cars are going so fast on highways, and they are rarely paying attention. I've been pretty lucky and have only had one flat tire in my life and was able to pull into a gas station when it happened. These stories are giving me serious Final Destination vibes, and I freaking love it. My father told me this story. As a young child, he was approached by a man who wanted some change to make a phone call. My father gave the guy some money, and the guy said it was too much, and that he wanted to give my father some change. My father got in the car with him so that they could go and get some change. While driving, something seemed off, so my father jumped out of the car at a stop sign and ran away. He didn't think about it again until he saw that guy on TV years later. It was John Wayne Gacy. Bro, what the frick? I've read about this one kid who narrowly escaped Gacy by jumping out of the car. And after this incident, the fricker installed a child lock in his car. That kid was your father. If that news article doesn't confirm this comment as true, then I don't know what would. Holy crap! This dude's dad escaped John Wayne Gacy, and he literally has evidence that it happened. And that Gacy actually had to fix his locks because of it. Damn, imagine if the previous person had jumped out of the car and he installed the child locks before this guy's dad was in the car. This would be a totally different story. I met this one guy as a young adult. He was a mutual friend in my friend group. I thought he was cute, so I gave him my social media information, and we chatted back and forth for a little bit. I moved away from the area not long after we met. After I moved, he messaged me constantly, asking me to come over to his house, attend parties with him, come to his area so he could buy me a drink, etc. I politely declined every time. This went on for literally a year. Eventually, I entered into a committed relationship. Shortly after he asked if I had a boyfriend, I said yes, and he proceeded to send me a bunch of pictures of his ding-dong. I instantly blocked him. 2 years later, through our mutual friends, I found out that he had been accused of drugging and raping several women. When police came to his house to arrest him, they found a woman in a dog kennel in his living room. I'm not sure about the entire story behind the girl in the kennel, but just thinking about it freaks me out. Apparently, he is also being accused of trafficking women, and the girl in the kennel was one of his victims. He is currently in jail and is awaiting trial. I'm praying that justice is served. Dude, how many people in this world have either dodged a serial killer or dodged a sexual assault? Jesus, I feel like I'm in the minority here because I've never had to experience something like narrowly dodging a deathly encounter. And there are hundreds of stories in this thread related to avoiding these life-altering encounters. Years ago, I was going to be a groomsman for a good friend, and we were taking him to a bachelor's party at some strip clubs on a Friday night. At the last minute, I got paged from work and had to go in. I was off but on call and had to go. I was really pissed and upset about it. I called Big John and told him what happened and apologized. I worked 3 to 11 that night. After that, I went straight home and fell asleep. At about 6 in the morning, there was banging at my door that woke me. At the door was John's little sister, crying her eyes out. John and the other guys had a terrible auto accident on the way home, and there were no survivors. I still think about it now and then. I'm a non-drinker, so I would have been the designated driver, so I assume there would have been no accident if I was driving. On the other hand, maybe everyone was destined to die that night and I would have died too. One night when I was younger, about 9 years old, my 2 brothers and my mother's friend's 3 kids were playing at a school playground near my mother's friend's house. It was probably 8 p.m. We were all about 7 to 14 years old, and my brother was the oldest. A group of men in a white truck were stalking us for a while and continued to drive back and forth from the playground we were at. Every time we tried to go back to my mother's friend's house, they would turn sharp and race in front of us. The house was probably 100 yards away. Every time we tried to turn the other way and run to other houses, they did the same thing. It happened for about 10 minutes straight. Eventually, we noticed one of the men had jumped out of the back seat. Literally 15 seconds later, my mother pulled up to the close side of the playground to pick us up to go home. We all jumped in the car and raced home while most of us were crying from fear. Then we made s'mores, definitely a crazy memory. When I was like 16 years old, there was some guy going around, breaking into houses, watching women sleep and fondling at least one of them. My mom was spending the night with her boyfriend, so I was home alone. It was around 6 in the morning, and I woke up for some reason. I was up for like 1 minute at this point. I can't see crap without my glasses on, so I was just mindlessly staring out my open window when some guy just started climbing in. I screamed at him by saying the first thing I thought of. "Ah, what the frick are you doing?" He dropped back down and ran away. By the time I got my glasses on, he was long gone. I'm pretty sure it was just the surprise that I was awake that made him run, but I like to think I made him stop and wonder what he was doing. I'm always so thankful that I just happened to wake up. They caught him a few months later. I don't sleep with my windows open anymore. When I was like 9 years old, I was taking my grandpa's dog for a walk. He lived out in the country, and usually only people who lived around there were on the roads. So I was walking the dog, an Australian Shepherd I'd describe as stupidly happy. He loved everybody and everything. He had never been aggressive in the slightest. One day, this truck I didn't recognize drove past us, super slow, with just one guy in it. He got a little ahead of us, parked the truck, didn't turn it off, and started walking towards us. He shouted something along the lines of, "What are you doing out here all alone?" And before I could react or respond, the dog went full snarl, on his hunches, teeth bared, and started pulling the leash toward the guy, barking and snarling and snapping at him. I was having trouble even holding on to him at that point, and the guy just turned and ran back to his truck and took off super quick, kicking up a bunch of dirt from the road. Within 30 seconds, the dog was his normal, calm, goofy self with his tongue hanging out the side of his mouth and planted his butt right on the dirt. I don't know for sure what the guy planned on doing, but I think that dog might have saved my life. He was the best boy. This is exactly why I say, even if you never really thought about getting a dog, you should definitely think about getting one, especially if you live alone or walk frequently outside by yourself. A dog is an extremely strong deterrent for criminals and will likely make you a non-target if you are alone versus another person that is alone without a dog. Obviously, some criminals are beyond stupid and don't think, so take that advice with a grain of salt. But it's definitely something to think about if you don't have a ton of options. This is a story from my high school girlfriend's mom. I was floored by the story. She was out at a bar and met a cute guy. He was charming and suave. He wore a sports coat to this dumpy little campus bar and said that he was a law student. She almost gave him her number. Almost. Now, this was at the time when there was a serial murder a few streets over at a sorority house. Women in town were very much on edge, so she was playing it safe. A week later, she saw him in the newspaper and got a call from the Tallahassee Police Department. Apparently, they had found her ID, among many others, many of whom were deceased, in his personal effects. Turns out she was his type. Slender, blonde, and aged 17 to 30. He was probably casing her at the bar and had nicked her ID for her address. The suave law student was Ted Bundy.